Hi guys, yeah, it's been an interesting week, and struggling with daily things. My auntie was down with um my Alfie Belch's cousin Devon, so the two of them were playing, and you got to see that, and I was really happy. It was really nice to see, and those two were sorry, just get the screen. Hey, um, so it was really nice to see them, and just kind of have a nice moment where it warms your heart seeing two Labradors playing together, and they met a few on their walk as well. Alfie was given out because Devon has too much energy for him, but he was happy he was down, and if you put one in the room away from the other, because sometimes Alf was getting a bit upset when Devon would go near his face, not aggressively, and I was having to tell myself, Alfie, just to say to Alfie that it's okay and calm him down. And also Greg Bell who were asking, has Alfie ever gotten aggressive or vicious? And it's kind of like, no, not really, but there are occasions where he gets pissed off or annoyed, and that's kind of a thing with Labradors. I think they're all right with humans, apparently, but then with other dogs, they can sometimes be jealous and they want all eyes on me. And Devon's very energetic, and I think there's a bit of fox Labrador in them, which are bred for hunting foxes. That's why they have the name and also the colour. Jeremy Clarkson has some. If you are wondering if you ever watch Clarkson's farm, you'll see them. They're lovely. It was lovely to see him. Devon's a lovely fella. Last time I met him, he was a lot more anxious, so it's nice to see how calm he is this time. And it was nice that when we did separate them because they were getting a little bit excited, we put one in the room and then we put the other out in the kitchen. Occasionally, we were trying to let them play with each other as much as they could. We went on a massive walk today on the beach, and that was lovely. It was really nice to see how happy they were with each other, and you know, just kind of warms your soul, and that's what I wanted to make this video about because I've only recently finished watching two documentaries about two very famous people. One is very liked, the other is despised, and people hate working with them. And I think it's a good example of the impact that good people leave on others, but also the burden that they face. And I think it's a really good example of why the good die young. To say God takes the young first, but I guess you're kind of asking, is that fair? So who I'm talking about is John Candy and Chevy Chase. So they work together in a National Lampoon film, Vacation. They're going to Moose Park or something. I don't know the name of it, but there's a moose at the front anyway. I never saw the film. I've seen Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase, and I kind of thought it was interesting. Sometimes he can be funny, but he's not well liked, and I think that's for good reason. He's meant to be an arsehole, like really obnoxious and really difficult to work with. And I thought we kind of look at him first, but then I'll kind of end on a good note. And it is sad though talking about John Candy because John Candy was someone who I looked at and I always thought of him as the big happy head, and in many ways he's like a Labrador. He's Canadian. In case anyone's wondering, Americans don't be stealing him. He's Canadian, one of Canada's best exports, as are Catherine O'Hara, Dan Aykroyd, Eugene Levy, and Martin Short. Love Martin Short, that happy little head. It's also nice to see Steve Martin paying tribute to him as well because I really like planes, trains, and automobiles. My favourite movie, probably with John Candy, Home Alone, obviously was pretty good, but I also really liked him in Uncle Buck because he's able to be funny, caring, and charismatic. A lot of people said that movie was a great example of how he was, especially with his kids. And it was very sad, but I want to start off with the other guy, that is Chevy Chase of Saturday Night Live and National Lampoon. He's also in Fletch, The Community, and the only movies I've seen him in are National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Um, then there was Vacation, but with Ed Helms and Christina Applegate, and Chevy Chase is a lot older. I think it's funny looking at him now. He looks like a younger version of himself wearing a fat suit, which I think is very unusual. Hot Tub Time Machine was the other films that I've seen him in. And in fairness, he can be funny at times, you know. Terrible host. He should not have hosted. That was a fucking disaster. The Chevy Chase show. Oh, and if you watch a roast of Chevy Chase, you'll see exactly his legacy or his stained legacy, you know. But if you look at his backstory, you know, you kind of see hurt people, and that's been said before. But you know, he went to private school, the preparatory schools. You're thinking to yourself, "Fuck this guy! He had everything." You know, he's an arrogant wasp. You know, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and he has deep colonial roots, which kind of speaks to something. He's a New Yorker, I believe. But even the name of the documentary, I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. And then he used to say it. The reason they called it that is because he used to always say it when presenting Saturday Night Live. I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. And then do some stupid gag where instead of picking up the phone, he'd throw water himself. And, you know, you kind of think of the injustice in the world that he lived to 80 and John Candy died at 43, I believe. And his dad died at 35, which is insane to think. Both massive heart attacks. And touch wood, that doesn't happen to me because I've had a granddad that went out that way. And that's what I kind of think of, you know, that's how it kind of hits home for me. That's why I kind of relate to this because my granddad Peter, R.I.P., which is my maternal grandfather, my mum's father, my mother's father, everyone spoke fondly of him. Like, and my dad wouldn't be someone to speak fondly of anyone. You know, he's not the type. He usually hasn't got a good word to say about anybody. But he spoke fondly of my granddad Peter and even corrected his father and the other fella, my granddad Liam, R.I.P. as well. You know, he died last year. But we weren't close. And it wasn't for lack of trying on my part. You know, I made a lot of effort with him and just wasn't a nice man. You know, just because he's dead doesn't mean that it's any less true. 91 years old. Like, my granddad Peter was 64 when he died. You know, so 27 years in the difference. I'm 27 years old. It's insane. And I often do think, you think of injustices in the world. You think to yourself, why the fuck did he have to die so young? You know, he looked after everybody. He was loving. He was caring. He always looked after everybody else, put others before himself. Which my granddad Liam, aka Lem as we call him, never did. You know, he never really did. Everything was always too much trouble. You know, nothing he gave you was ever without consequence. There was never a free gift. You know, put it that way. A gift always required holding it over you. You know, just going, "Oh, I did this for you," and I kind of found myself doing that as well, which I need to really cut down on. You know, when I feel unappreciated, what I do is I'll go, "Well, I did this for you, so you help me out now." Do you know what I mean? It's not a case of I'll hold it over you or go, seeing as I did this for you, now you do this for me, now to trim my debt. It's more if I ask someone to do something and they don't do it, I'm kind of like, well, I did this for you, you know. Can't you just help me out? You know, if I have to beg, I'm like, well, I fucking did this for you, so you can help me out now, do you know? But I need to stop doing that. Just kind of be more like, could you please just help me out because I'm struggling right now. It's a better way of coming at it. But this kind of hit home for me because I am thinking one granddad was loving. Everybody liked him, you know. He looked after everybody and did a lot of things that a lot of men don't do. You know, put others way before himself, whereas the other never put anyone else above himself. You know, my grandmother had to work two jobs and be a housewife. But he'd complain all the time that he worked 6 days a week, so did my other granddad. And people who complain about it go, I never had time to do this or that. Very often you'll find they did, they just couldn't have been arsed or it was too much. He just never put himself out, never cared. Whenever I asked him anything, it was always, how would I know that? Or I can't help you with that. He was very unpleasant when I was growing up. I remember that much. And he said to me that I'd outstayed my welcome because, or me and my brother had, because we were over there with our cousin who was over from Holland and we were happy to see him. So we were delighted, we were there thinking, great, he's over here. We're delighted to see him and we'll stay with him as long as we can because we never see him. And he was like, no, you've outstayed your welcome. Off you go now. So I think it's a really good example of one who everybody speaks of fondly, and then the other nobody likes. They can't stand being in the room. They tolerate him, and the reason I didn't go to his funeral was because I just felt like it was going to be bullshit. I tried with him as well. I thought in his later years he's softening up, he's getting more pleasant and nicer to deal with, but he wasn't. And he accused me of robbing money from him and ripping him off and all this crap that I would never dream of doing. All the while I was going buying him shopping and playing in the house. All things like that. I'm not looking for praise. I was doing them because he was my grandfather, and I kind of felt like it'd be nice if after all this time, all this shitty years that we had where we didn't get along and he was cold and miserable, wouldn't it be nice if he softened up in his old age and we built a relationship? And when he did finally die, we could go, okay, look, you weren't great at the beginning, but you've ended on good terms. And I'm glad I got to know you a bit better later in life. Even as I'm saying it, I feel hopeful, but that's not what happened, unfortunately, and it was quite upsetting, I won't lie. And it fucked me up because even though I wasn't really grieving his death, I was grieving the relationship I never got to have with him. And I also feel the same way about my other granddad, Peter, because everybody has all these fond memories of him, and I never got to have any of them. And the fact that he died when I wasn't even a year old, I was born, I was the only grandkid that was born while he was still alive. It just feels cruel, it feels like a bad joke that he got taken away and all the things he could have taught me. And then the waste that was my other granddad who never taught me anything. He just sat on his arse all day watching the TV and was always checking his watch. Even when he was in seeing my grandmother Lena, R.I.P. Um, R.I.P. to all the grandparents. Judy as well, who was a great woman. Both my grandmothers were good people. Both very different people, but both, I think fondly about them because they tried. They did their best, and I can safely say that. And that's good to know, and you kind of make peace with that. Plus the fact that Lena, my paternal grandmother, died on my 18th birthday, like bang on, as I was having my 18th birthday party. Feels like another bad joke because I actually did love her as well, and it's such a monumental milestone, the 18th birthday. I had friends over in the house as well, and it just felt like an occasion that I never thought I would have because I wasn't given a great prognosis. And once the autism diagnosis came on, the diagnosis, all the osises. But yeah, it does feel like a lot's been taken, and I know it sounds like a pity party, but in a way, this really hit home for me. I only finished watching the end of the John Candy documentary there, so he was loved by all. He seemed like such a lovely guy, and I think if ever there was an example of God taking the good ones young, it was that. Whereas the other guy, Chevy, only turned 80, so 37 years older than John Candy, and he's not dead yet, and he could go on forever. But even when he's talking to the interviewer, just the way he goes on, like when she says she's trying to figure him out and just a real blank stare of no shit. Put the glasses on and beat Chevy because he wears his glasses. No shit. And then the smile. And then he's there going, it's not going to be easy for you. And then she says, why is that? And then he goes, you're not bright enough. How's that? And then he kind of creepily smiles, and that's all I'm going to do on that. Um, but yeah, it's just looking at him, you think, I'm not surprised a lot of people don't like you because even after all his health concerns, the kids that he's had, grandkids, and you think you would have softened and gotten a bit nicer and realised as well that there's a reason people don't like you, but it doesn't seem to happen with him. So I'm going to share my screen now anyway, and we'll take a look. The man, the myth, the legend. So I'm just going to go into him now. Freddie Mercury. Make a documentary about him, or I'll make a video about him. There he is. His real name's Cornelius. Yeah, doesn't he look like he's wearing a fat suit of his older self? Cornelius Crane. Yeah, real upper elite type of name, isn't it? I think that's him during the roast of Chevy Chase. Yeah, 1943. 82 years old. He was only 80 in the documentary. There we are now. You can see his Princeton educated Manhattan book editor. Yeah. His brother Ned as well was an interesting one. Because when they were talking about him, he seemed a lot more mild mannered, not as up his own arse, is the only way I can put it. Yeah. So Princeton educated, and then was a psychoanalyst, I think, was his adoptive or stepfather, I should say. His adoptive maternal grandfather did not bequeath, aka give, any assets to Chase's mother when he died. And he says he was physically and psychologically abused as a child by his mother and stepfather, John Cederquist, a psychoanalyst. In the biography, he said, I lived in fear all the time, deathly fear. Abuse he was subjected to as a child included being awakened in the middle of awoken, wouldn't it be? I don't know. Awakened in the middle of the night by his mother to be slapped repeatedly across the face, lashes to the back of his legs, punches to the head by his stepfather, and being locked in a bedroom closet for hours. As a punishment for being suspended from school at age 14, Chase was locked in the basement for several days. Both his parents died in 2005. So he was educated in a private school anyway. Yeah, Riverdale Country School. Very fancy. And he graduated as a valedictorian. I didn't notice this though. I actually never got to this. He's a draft dodger, is he? Chase did not enter medical school. So he was due to go into medical school. So got to be quite brainy as well, which meant that he was subject to the military draft. Chase was not drafted, and when he appeared in January 1989 as the first guest of the just launched late night, the Sajak, Pat Sajak, I've heard of him before actually, the Pat Sajak show, He said he had tricked his draft board into believing he deserved a 4F classification by falsely claiming that he had homosexual tendencies. I can't go into the military because I'm gay. Yeah, 4F classification. I saw that as well for Billy West, aka the voice of Fry, Philip J. Fry, um, Professor Farnsworth, and Dr. Zoidberg in Futurama. Might talk about him in the future, Billy West, if you want me to do a video on him. I really like him, and he's also a great advocate for autism and ADHD, which I know that Cynthia has. So we will look into that. We've also got a couple of people who have the ADHD spectrum. So we've got Leah G8010. Still haven't forgotten about you. Let us know how you're getting on. And then Robbie Woods, aka Robin Woodbury, also has potential ADHD. We're not quite sure yet. And then Callum, aka Beans3549, you have autism. Now we were talking about schizoid traits as well, just something I'd like to look into a bit more. My belief on that has changed. I don't believe that people. Now I've watched people who are medically qualified to say this, but it seems like there's not as much, not a desire for any relationships. It just seems too hard, and you're not in tune with your emotions. It's like you're externalized from your environment. But we will talk about that, and I have made a video talking about the overlap between schizoid personality disorder, which is a cluster A personality disorder, the odd, eccentric type, kind of a solitary type of lifestyle. And includes as well schizoid personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, which they say is a precursor for schizophrenia, and then paranoid personality disorder. You hear a lot more about the cluster B, the erratic, dramatic. That'd be your borderlines, narcissistic, antisocial, and histrionic personality disorders. But we will go ahead and we'll talk about that anyway. I'm getting sidetracked. My apologies. But yeah, we're going to look at Chevy Chase and kind of how he's his own worst enemy. Like he was massive. Greg Belt, you're an older American gentleman, so you could probably tell me you're from Washington, so you're from the northern state. I mean, I don't even think that matters, but you would know how massive he was anyway. He was huge and kind of for his stupid, kind of childish slapstick humor. As they say, throwing water in his ear. He's supposed to answer the phone. He picks water up and chucks it in his ear and goes, "Hello." It was funny because it shows how in tune me and my brother Sam are because he asked me, "What does slapstick comedy mean?" And I was there trying to describe it to him, and then I was like, "How's he going to know what I'm talking about?" And then instead of actually telling him what it meant, I was like, the noises in comedies like, and then boom, like the Three Stooges, where it's boom. And he was like, "Ah, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about." When they pinch them on the nose and it's the boom, or the lasso, lasso, as we say in Ireland. It's funny how he knew exactly what I was talking about. But Chase was, and this is his early career, and he just ballooned, as did I in weight. Chase was a member of an early underground comedy ensemble called Channel One, which he co founded in 1967, a year after my mum was born, my mother. He also wrote a one-page spoof of Mission Impossible for Mad magazine in 1970 and was a writer for the short-lived Smothers Brothers TV show Comeback in the spring of 1975. And then the National Lampoon is where he became huge, a syndicated satirical radio series. The National Lampoon Radio Hour also featured John Belushi, RIP. Kind of had the same goofy type of comedy style. It also included John Belushi, Gilda Radner, um, Radner, can let me know anyway. Gilda Radner, Bill Murray, and Brian Doyle Murray, Bill's brother. And these two, Bill and Chevy, would have such a falling out. They'd butt heads quite a bit. So yeah, fall of the week. You see it here. If you look through it, that's what it is. It's kind of stupid and goofy, but you can understand how it's funny. It's light-hearted. Pratfall, known as Fall of the Week, became known for his skill at physical comedy. He'd go up to receive an award and he'd fall over onto his face, that kind of thing, which is why he got hooked on painkillers, opioids. He was also quite a big fan of cocaine. If anyone remembers the scene where he's snorting a huge line of coke and then just turns around and goes, "Yeah." He's hoovering it up from a distance as well. He's going along like this and then just turns around with it all over his face and just goes, "Yeah." Which I did laugh at, I have to say, quite a bit. So this was an impression of Gerald Ford, who tripped while disembarking from Air Force One in Salzburg, Austria. Beautiful country, Austria. I highly recommend you visit. I was in Vienna. But here we go anyway. Bumbling klutz. That describes him perfectly. Became a favourite device of Chase's and helped form the popular concept of Ford as being a clumsy man, despite Ford having been a star athlete during his university years. In later years, Chase met and became friendly with President Ford, probably one of the only people he ever did become friendly with. Chase was the original anchor for the weekend update segment of SNL, Saturday Night Live, and his catchphrase introduction, "I'm Chevy Chase and you're not," became well known. His trademark conclusion, "Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow," was later resurrected by Jane Curtin and Tina Fey. Okay, then we're going to have a look because I kind of just want you to see how his fall from grace was all his own doing. He just thought he was much bigger than everybody else. And kind of like his exit from Saturday Night Live was his big downfall. And he even said it himself in the series, "I should have never left SNL. That was a big mistake." And the abomination that was the Chevy Chase show, the less you know about that, the better. And I'm sure he'd agree with that. He had a real act for engaging an audience, but he certainly was not a good presenter because he just didn't seem to care enough about the guests that he had on. The thing about Graham Norton and Alan Carr is that they're very personable people. They give a shit about people and they learn about their guests before they come on, which Chevy just didn't seem to give a shit about. He was trying to give the quick one-liner jokes, and lots of people said he was good at slapstick sort of physical comedy and goofy comedy, but stand up was not his thing. He couldn't engage an audience just by standing up and talking. Anyway, yeah, did you ever see that? So actually, that was kind of funny. He wrote and performed the news for the hard of hearing, and then Garrett Morris was up on the screen. So instead of being, you think it's going to be sign language, like you have on Channel 4, where they're kind of mapping it out for you. Not trying to insult any deaf people, but this is thank you, or I think that's thank you. But the sign language is what you're expecting, and Garrett Morris is just screaming. He's saying exactly what Chevy Chase is saying. He's repeating everything, but he's roaring at the camera. It's quite clever because it's the hard of hearing, not the deaf. I thought it was very clever. Chase claimed that this version of the weekend, sorry, his version of the weekend update was the inspiration for later news satires such as The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, Stephen Colbert. Yeah, don't really watch either. I know Stephen Colbert, he's got the glasses. The Colbert Report. Weekend Update was later revived as a segment on the Chevy Chase Show, a short-lived late-night talk show, and thank God it was short-lived. Produced by Chase and broadcast by Fox Broadcasting Company. Just kind of to show you how big he was. Chase was committed contractually to SNL for only 1 year as a writer and became a cast member during rehearsals. just before the show's premiere. English people say premiere, and then, well, in Ireland we kind of say premiere like the way guys in the US do. So we're with you on that one. We also say scallions, not spring onion. He received two Emmy Awards and a Golden Globe Award for his comedy writing and live comic acting on the show. So obviously, he was quite good at engaging an audience and doing what he did. He was very good at the goofy, physical slapstick comedy that he did. Rolling Stone's February 2015 appraisal of all 141 SNL cast members to date, Chase was ranked 10th in overall importance. Strange as it sounds, Chase might be the most underrated SNL player they wrote. Quite big. It took him only one season to define the franchise. Without that deadpan arrogance, the whole SNL style of humor would fall flat. So his biggest strength was also his biggest weakness. We're going to get to that now. So, in 1975, New York Magazine cover story, which called him the funniest man in America. NBC executives referred to Chase as the first real potential successor to Johnny Carson. And I've heard of Johnny Carson. I know he was huge in his day. He's only 30 years old when he died. Um, Six Primetime Emmy Awards, the Television Academy's 1980 Governor's Award. You get the picture. He was huge. So to be called the next Johnny Carson or the potential successor is quite extreme. It's quite a big deal. And they claim that Chase would begin guest hosting the Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson within 6 months of the article. Chase dismissed rumours that he could be the next Carson by telling New York, "I'd never be tied down to 5 years interviewing TV personalities." Yeah, he does his own thing. Chase did not appear on the program until May 4th, 1977, when he was promoting a primetime special for NBC. Carson, who was never a fan of SNL, later said of Chase, he couldn't ad lib a fart after a baked bean dinner. Whatever the fuck that means. So you see how massive he is anyway. But in the middle of SNL's second season, Chase became the second member of the original cast to leave the show after George Cole during the first season. While he landed starring roles in several films on the strength of his SNL fame, he asserted that the principal reason for his departure was the reluctance of his girlfriend, Jacqueline Carlin, to move to New York. Chase moved to Los Angeles, married Carlin, and was replaced by Bill Murray, although he made a few cameo appearances on the show during the second season. Then it says Chase hosted SNL 8 times from 1978 to 1997. It was reported that SNL creator and showrunner Lorne Michaels had been shocked by Chase's behavior during his 1997 appearance as the host and had banned him as a result, reports which Michaels later disputed, calling the claims idiotic. While Chase has not returned to SNL to host since 1997, he appeared on the show's 25th anniversary special in 1999 and was interviewed for the 2005 NBC special on the first 5 years of SNL. So the special was done basically highlighting the first 5 years of SNL. Later appearances included a Caddyshack skit, which is a big movie with him, Bill Murray, and Rodney Dangerfield, I believe. So, Caddyshack skit featuring Bill Murray, a 1997 episode with guest host Chris Farley as the land shark in a Weekend Update segment in 2001, another Weekend Update segment in 2007, and Justin Timberlake's monologue in 2013 as a member of the Five Timers Club, where he was reunited with his Three Amigos co-stars Steve Martin and Martin Short, also now together in Only Murders in the Building, which I have to watch again. I have to get to the next season of it and getting back into it again. He also participated in the 40th anniversary special in February 2015. So you can see how massive he was. Narrowly escaped death by electrocution. Yeah, they did landing lights because he was supposed to be mimicking a. He was supposed to be mimicking a dream where he thought he was flying. That was what was going on in the dream. The landing lights. The current pass through Chase's arms, back, and neck muscles. The near death experience followed the end of his marriage to Carolyn, and Chase experienced a period of deep depression. So he's capable of feeling human emotions anyway. Right. Paul Simon was good friends with him. That's of Simon and Garfunkel. FYI. There's a Caddyshack too, but that was a flop. So yeah, you can kind of see the picture, but yeah, he was Clark Griswold, the Griswold Family Christmas on National Lampoon's Vacation. Battle with substance abuse. So Chase was admitted in 1986 to the Betty Ford Center, which is where they said rich people go when they've had too much drugs and their body starts failing them. It's a rich rehab. That's what they said in the series anyway. It's where the rich people go to get sober. So he was addicted to prescription painkillers. His use began after he experienced ongoing back pain related to his pratfalls. The pratfalls were the falling over in a goofy way. And the definition: physical comedy, pratfalls, is a form of comedy focused on manipulation of the body for a humorous effect. It can include slapstick, clowning, mime, physical stunts, or making funny faces. And that pretty much describes Chevy Chase to a T. So he took them during his Saturday Night Live appearances. 2010, he said that his drug abuse had been low level. And then he entered the Hazelden Clinic in September 2016, which is when my grandmother died as well. Just loads of RIPs for alcoholism. And he kept saying that he didn't have a problem with alcoholism, but he had problems with drugs. Alcohol is a drug, and it's one that I've struggled with. And yeah, it just seems like it seemed like he was in deep denial. There was also a part where the interviewer was asking him like about his abuse and saying, "How do you feel about it now, or can you look at it and like can you look at it now and think that was quite an awful time in my life? The abuse he suffered by his mother and stepfather, and he did something quite stupid and just ill timed. Then he kind of got an insight into how he used comedy and this bravado that he has of I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. I won't be hurt. Or even though he admitted in the interview that after saying you're not going to be able to understand me because you're not bright enough, he said I'm complex and I hurt easily. He admits that he hurts easily, so he shows a bit of vulnerability. But when she asks him about the abuse, he pretends there's a fly in his head and he slaps his head and then puts it in his mouth, and it's quite stupid. It's kind of what he do in his comedy sketch, but it was real deflection. It was just, oh, sorry, what was the question? Whereas, he heard full well what the question was. He just chose to ignore it and do a stupid joke instead. So it's an obvious defense mechanism, as is pretending that I'm this arsehole. He kind of plays into it as well. Now, I mean, they say in the interview, I don't like, I don't think Chevy knows how not to be an arsehole. He just is. It's not his fault. It's just who he is. And there are certain things you can't ignore that are just quite negative about his personality and quite unlikable. Um, so in 2004, during a speech at the People for the American Way benefit at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, Chevy mocked Republican President George W. Bush, John Kerry's opponent in the 2004 election, referring to Bush as an uneducated, real line schmuck and a dumb fuck. You're a real line schmuck and a dumb fuck. Like to hear George Bush say those words. His comments upset both the organisers and the crowd. He endorsed Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. A lot of people who seem to endorse Hillary Clinton are upper class or wealthier people. I think it shows you who supports him versus. Sorry, it shows you who supports Hillary versus who supports Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the man of the people, apparently, but certainly doesn't seem to care about people right now. Not that he ever did. He's upper class as well. It's just a difference in who he claims he supports. He wants to buy Greenland now. Go figure. So Bill Murray has not made any lies up about how much he despised Chevy Chase. He really just opened up on him. So the fight with him, before performing a third season episode of Saturday Night Live in 1978, Chase got into a fist fight with Bill Murray in John Belushi's dressing room. It occurred when Chase returned to host the show after his exit as a full-time cast member in 1976. Murray had reportedly made a derogatory comment about Chase's troubled marriage with Jacqueline Carlin, leading to Chase to criticize Bill Murray's physical appearance. So basically, what was said was Bill Murray has a lot of acne scarring, some of which I have myself, and Chevy Chase was slagging him off, basically saying, um, Lance Armstrong, jeez. Lance Armstrong's going to cycle onto the moon. Neil Armstrong could land a rocket in your face, basically saying that his face looked like a moon because of all the potholes in it. And then Bill Murray said something like, "Why don't you go fuck your wife because of the troubled marriage?" And that led to them having a bust up. But obviously, Chase, he was quite arrogant, and Bill Murray really didn't like it. Bill Murray said to him, apparently, if I remember from the documentary, he said, "You're not good enough to be this arrogant, more or less." He said, "You're medium," something like that, medium talent, aka you've got a persona that doesn't justify your actual abilities. You're not that talented, you're not that gifted, so you don't deserve to think that you're this good because you're not. Reality check, and he really didn't like it apparently. So this was witnessed by Billy Joel, the cast members Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, and Gilda Radner. In a talk show appearance in 2021, Newman noted of the altercation, "It was very sad and painful and awful, and painful and awful." She added, "I think they both knew the one thing they could say to one another that would hurt the most, and that's what I think's incited it." So they're basically just trying to really get under each other's skin. Pardon the pun, because that's exactly what Chevy did with Bill Murray, mocked his skin. So again, I think they both knew the one thing that they could say to one another that would hurt the most. That's what I think incited the incident. Chase and Murray later reconciled with the help of Harold Ramis. Ramis. It's Ramis, isn't it? Yeah, he was the director of a couple of different shows with John Candy as well. They all kind of were intertwined. It was in Ghostbusters, is what I know him for anyway. And then Stripes, yeah, and Caddyshack. So Chase has struggled with his physical health as well as his mental health. Obviously, the electrical current passing through his arms, back, and neck muscles, which is not good. And then in 2021, so only 4 years ago, Well, five now. Jesus, I still forget that it's 2026. Chase was put into a medically induced coma for 8 days following heart failure. He spent 5 weeks in the hospital. At the time, it was announced as undisclosed issues with his heart. Chase has said that the coma has led to memory loss. Not surprised. All right. Contemporary evaluations increasingly position Chase as a historically significant but polarizing figure whose influence on comedic form is widely acknowledged, even as his career illustrates shifting expectations around collaboration and workplace culture in television, aka, falling out with everybody. So yeah, he's obviously a very divisive character, very famous, but walk, don't walk, pedestrian. That's his first role. You can really see he had talent, but he's his own worst enemy. He falls out with people so easily, and he's just hard to like. And while people say he doesn't seem to care, I don't think that's true. So yeah, this documentary was made in 2026. It was released, but at the time he was 80 years old. Um, so yeah, just not a very likable guy. And I'm just going to see the roast of Chevy Chase because a lot of roasts basically what they were saying in the critique of Chevy Chase and other videos that I've watched. They say roasts are usually done by friends who are taking the piss out of you, slagging, having a laugh, with a banter, if you like. But they like you, they shake your hand, and then they pat you on the back. People seem to genuinely use it as a means of assassinating his character, and it seemed pretty justified as well. A lot of negative things said about him. It's basically people getting their own back on him, and he kind of acted like a victim. But it does seem like he deserved it. Stephen Colbert said it here. Now we'll have a look. Reject optional. So Stephen Colbert and Chevy Chase in the infamous 2002 roast. Oh, geez, I'm kind of at a loss here. I don't really know what to say. I know that these roasts usually involve a fair amount of good-natured ribbing. That's what I'm talking about there. But when I was asked to do this, I was informed that this was actually going to be honouring Mr. Chase, and I am appalled at some of the things that I have heard said about this man. And I don't really mean out here. I mean backstage. Some really hideous, hurtful, hateful things you could never take back, and I will not be party to it. I'm sorry. I've got to draw a line because who am I to attack Chevy Chase? I don't know Chevy Chase. I have never met Chevy Chase or Mr. Chase. I'm uncomfortable calling him Chevy. Seems to be a lot of pausing in this. The only thing I think of when I look at this man is there, but for the grace of God, go I. Why would I tempt the comedy gods to strike me down like this, to leave me pale and pear shaped, a humorous husk of my former self, a humorless husk of my former self, haunting the halls of Hollywood like some sort of walking, waking cautionary tale, shapeless and odorless and colourless, grey on beige, a comedy lamprey just sucking the joy out of everything I touch. Okay. Heavy laughter from everyone, really? I guess you have to actually be there or hear it. I won't do it. It just seemed like he wasn't going to say anything about it. This is an interesting comment there, though. Apparently, the reason this particular roast was so brutal was that none of Chevy's friends showed up because they knew he had thin skin. When Chevy arrived and saw the lineup, he said something to the effect of, "Who are these nobodies?" in front of the group of comedians who had been asked to perform. From that point on, the gloves were off. So, he just seems to bring it on himself, and it's very hard to actually have sympathy for him. He just seems to be. Here we are now. Just having a look at this. He's not Chevy, he's an asshole. History of Chevy Chase's horrific behaviour by Max Reed. When you become famous, you've got like a year or two where you act like a real asshole. Bill Murray told Tom Shales and James Miller when they interviewed him for Live from New York. Their oral history of Saturday Night Live. You can't help yourself. It happens to everybody. You've got like 2 years to pull it together, or it's permanent. He was talking, of course, about Chevy Chase, his opponent in a famous backstage fist fight. The two are friendly now, and it seems as though Murray wanted to imply that Chase had pulled himself together following his sudden rise of fame. No, he didn't. But by most accounts, Chevy Chase's assholedom was permanent. Yeah, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. The history of Chevy Chase being a jerk is long and varied, and from what I've heard of Chevy, is hard at work creating new legends of his own dickishness as the old stories become more widely known. I heard a recent story about Chevy unloading on a nervous intern who spilled a small amount of Coca Cola in front of Chase and SNL creator Lorne Michaels. "Why don't you just piss in it?" he snarled. And I think that kind of speaks to his character. Mike Tyson famously said, and actually John Candy said this as well, they both judged people by how they treated wait staff, so waiters, people who are serving you, who you are paying to serve you, and who have to be nice to you or they'll lose their job and they might not get a tip from you either. I know America's a big tipping culture of money, that is, not poking people. But that just really speaks to his character that he's nice to people who he thinks can bring him up in the world. Very narcissistic, and I mean that not necessarily in the medical sense, just as you would think of it. I think one word that definitely describes Chevy Chase is narcissistic, 100%. He's always making snide comments and remarks to people who are clearly, they're paid to be there or serve him, and he has a hold over them. And you can tell that he really gets off on that. He really enjoys the fact that he's up here, he's Chevy Chase, and you're not. And yeah, I really don't like that about him. But here we are, and we get to it now. But you don't even need to hunt down anecdotes of Chevy screaming at interns. Between the hundreds of thousands of words that have been written about Saturday Night Live, his weirdly public ongoing spats with actors and writers on Community, and the unbelievably dickish and petty interviews he's given over the years, there's plenty of evidence that Chevy Chase is an asshole. Here's a working timeline. If you've got any Chevy Chase stories, send them my way at max@gawker.com. Who he pissed off. So we mentioned a couple of these names already. John Belushi, Al Franken, Lorraine Newman, Gilda Radner, and basically the whole cast and writing staff of Saturday Night Live. How? According to Jeff Weingrad and Doug Hill's Saturday Night, a backstage story of Saturday Night Live, Chevy was known as a viciously effective put-down artist, the sort who could find the one thing somebody was sensitive about, a pimple on the nose, Bill Murray's acne, perhaps, and then kid about it mercilessly. In meetings, he'd smirk at writers' suggestions and say, "Gee, I don't think that's very good at all." As the show, and in particular Chevy, took off, his co-workers accused him of not giving them enough credit in interviews, taking all the credit and saying it was all my hard work, none of theirs. He was also doing too much coke and spending much of his time bragging about his fame and ordering people around set. Big talk for a draft dodger. So he does, like, you're kind of there feeling sorry for him because he's an 82-year-old man being ripped into and people saying all these negative things about him, and you're like, oh, give the guy a break. But when you look back at it, you really have to go, well, fuck him. He deserved it. He brought it all on himself. Johnny Carson, as we talked about, couldn't ad lib a fart in the big bean dinner after Chevy Chase dismissed chatter that he would be the next Carson by telling New York, I'd never be tied down. Yeah, we already watched that. And in fairness, he never was because he was shit at being a host, which he weirdly enough admitted himself. Who he pissed off? Lorne Michaels. Lorne and Chevy were close friends until Chevy, without warning, decided to leave the show at the end of his contract and do a handful of primetime specials for NBC, severing his relationship with Barney Brillstein, the manager he shared with Lorne, and signing with William Morris in the process. Chevy was a scumbag the way he left. One of the writers told Weingrad and Hill, deceitful and dishonest about the whole thing. When staff writer Tom Davis asked why he was leaving, Chevy said, money, lots of money. Again, really narcissistic, just, I don't care, that's your problem, not mine. Once it doesn't serve him anymore, he's not going to stick around. There's no loyalty with him. And I think that shows that he's lacking in any sort of loyalty. He serves his own needs, nobody else's. And so, like, when he got depressed, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people said, fuck you. No wonder you're depressed because you're a shitty human being. And that's why I always think never judge someone until you've walked 1,000 miles in their shoes. And also don't be an arsehole and tell someone to snap out of their depression because that could be you one day. And I think this is a good example of that. You could be suffering from that one day and don't expect sympathy when you've never given it. I think Bill Burr, I've changed my opinion a lot of Bill Burr because, he tends to be like that. And he even said it himself that he was the most judgmental prick and very unempathetic until he got depressed. And then he's like, oh, that's what it feels like. But don't expect empathy if you're not willing to give it. Do you know what I mean? And Chevy Chase certainly doesn't look like the type to give empathy. Neither does Bill Burr, by that matter. For that matter. So Jacqueline Carlin, his ex-wife, Carlin, who Chevy married right after he left the show, SNL, filed for divorce 17 months later, he cited threats of violence. He then cited his engagement and impending marriage to Carlin for a reason for leaving Saturday Night Live, a blame the bitch strategy, according to one of the women on the show. Just take a breath here, sorry. Who we pissed off? Jane Curtin. When Chevy returned to host the show for the first time after his departure, he insisted on doing the weekend update segment that had been his trademark. According to some accounts, including Chevy's, this pissed Jane off. In Live from New York, Jane insists that she didn't really care and that Chevy was expecting a reaction that he wasn't getting from me. So let's have a drink before we get into this one. According to Chevy, John Belushi had spent a lot of time poisoning the cast against him. In particular, Bill Murray, who was more or less his replacement on the show. Bill apparently confronted Chevy about something, possibly the weekend update situation. The two traded barbs. Murray told Chase to go home and fuck his wife, as he said earlier. Chase told Murray his face looked like something Neil Armstrong had landed on. There we go. And the confrontation turned physical. Chase's account of the fight in Live from New York is hilarious, both for being so self-serving and for his insistence that he, an upper middle class 14th generation New Yorker, and that's the thing. Like if you look, there's an interesting website I like to look at called Ethnic Celebs. Basically, you can look at their background, their ethnic background, and I'm kind of it's just interesting. I just find it interesting looking at people who claim Native American ancestry. There's a lot of people who claim it, but it's never verified. Johnny Depp has gotten into a lot of trouble over that. Although, in fairness, he does kind of look a bit native, and yeah, he was in Lone Ranger as Tonto, so the directors obviously thought so as well. But this is the thing as well, and I want to make a video, and I want you to tell me if you guys want the video on this. But the fake alpha male is something that pisses me off a lot. There's a lot of insecure people out there, and there's a lot of people who are preying on insecure people who are also themselves insecure. Your likes of Andrew Tate, who got battered in a fight, Wes Watson, all baldies because they're all pumping themselves full of drugs. The Paul brothers, who also got shown up, Anthony Joshua wasn't even going full strength and battered Jake Paul. They're all they're all minted as well. A lot of these people, they're all wealthy and from a wealthier background, and they go on like they're raised rough on the streets, and you're there thinking to yourself, you're fucking pathetic and you're embarrassing. You went to a private school, Harvard educated family and or Yale, Ivy League, and you're claiming that you're a tough guy from the main streets. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. An upper middle class 14th generation New Yorker had grown up on the edge of Harlem, sorry, the edge of East Harlem, and had been in lots of fistfights. It wasn't as if I was simply some guy who had never seen the other side of the tracks, Chase, who went to Dalton, and the Stockbridge School said I had. So, so he's obviously quite up his own arse, but also thinks he's a tough guy. And I think a lot of people are saying you're not. Terry Sweeney, who he made horrible remarks about, and he made him weigh himself because he was gay and just pick on something, real stuck up snob, as you say, Upper East Side, prep school wanker, asshole, Robert Downey Jr. Now, if you manage to piss John Lovitz off, John Lovitz is a lovable character. Doesn't seem like the type of person who would be angry at anybody unless it was justified. Funny guy. You ever watched The Rat Race, the movie? I love John Lovitz in that, where he's just joking with his wife. But we've already paid for the room. Now who's wasting money? And then when he's when he's in Grown Ups too, oh, he was hilarious. He was a janitor pretending to be a was it a yoga class or basically a fitness instructor, and everybody's looking at a short little fat man and going, "This guy really?" And he's there going, "Shake it, oh yeah, you loved it, you loved it." And he's video recording. It's kind of creepy and perverted now as I think about it for a PG movie, but he just goes, "I'm having a wonderful time." And in Friends, he was fucking hilarious. I know the answer, but would you like to make love to me? Just as well. It doesn't work anyway. And he starts crying. I have such fat hands. Going out with Jennifer Aniston, it's never an easy task. But we love John. And that's the point I'm getting at. If you manage to fall out with someone like him, Bill Murray, even though I like Bill Murray, I could understand why people would fall out with him. He just has quite a miserable persona, but I'm on Bill's side with this conflict. So here we go. Both Terry Sweeney and Robert Downey Jr. were quite young when he started mocking them, and he mocked Robert Downey Jr. because of the junior part. His dad was a famous director. We'll get into it now. I don't want to give it all away. So this is the cast of the 1985, 1986 season of SNL. Chase was back again to host in 1985 and seemed to piss off literally everyone, which he's quite good at doing. How to make the world hate you. He made fun of Robert Downey Jr.'s father. Didn't your father used to be a successful director? Whatever happened to him? Boy, he sure died. He sure went to hell and was relentlessly hateful to Terry Sweeney, suggesting that SNL's first openly gay cast member star a sketch where they weighed him every week to see if he had AIDS. Basically, if he lost weight every week because he was gay and must have AIDS. It was ridiculously, and watching the Jeffrey Dahmer series, monster series on Netflix, you kind of go, were they really that stupid and ignorant that they would think that just by touching someone who was gay, you would get AIDS? That's literally how it was. It wasn't even someone that had AIDS, it was someone who was gay. And homophobia seemed to play a huge role in Jeffrey Dahmer getting away with his crimes because the fear and the derogatory nature, the way people viewed gay people. But anyway, so then he ended up having to apologize and actually coming to my office. Sweeney says he was really furious that he had to apologize to me. Such a fucking narcissistic thing, isn't it? It's like, I have to say sorry to you. I have to admit I was wrong to you. It must have torn him up inside, and it's very satisfying. When you ever find yourself having sympathy for Chevy Chase, you just have to remind yourself when he was on top, he certainly put everybody else down. And that's why people don't like him. Now, there are people who love him, don't get me wrong, but you notice how he's slagging off Robert Downey Jr.'s father. And I imagine if he was a successful director, it wouldn't have been the same. He would have gone and licked his arse if he needed to. But he can put him down. He certainly knows how to hone in on something and really hammer away at it, chip away at people's confidence. Think of that for a second. He'd probably chip in at that. It's again a very narcissistic tactic. Your weakness, I'm going to hone in on that and I'm going to attack it immediately. And again, I'm not able to diagnose people, but I'm just saying this is a real life scenario of someone who's going to just find your weakness and be sure that they bring you down to bring themselves up. I'm on top, you're down below, you're my subservient down boy. You know, taking something like someone being gay and hammering that home. Don't get any ideas. He was literally furious. He had to apologize. So never being able to admit you're wrong. You know, as a coda to Chevy's SNL assholery, will note that he ran into Live from New York author James Miller a few years after the book's publication. Angry with his status in the book as a recurring villain, Chevy proceeded to prove everyone right by immediately going off on Miller. And one of the authors received a sobbing phone call from his wife, Janie. Let's see how many more of these, Jesus. Howard Stern. Oh, there's a lot of people here. We will go through with it. Fuck it. Let's do it. I have to prove my point. I will do it. I will never apologize to anybody. I'm a narcissist. The entire television viewing public. Chevy returned to television in 1993 with a high profile attempt by Fox to fill the void left by a retiring Johnny Carson, who said he would never be like him. In a New York cover profile from before the show's premiere, highly recommended, if only for the parenthetical, where Chase tries to blame the huge flop nothing but trouble on poor Dan Aykroyd, throwing his cast members under the bus. The show already feels doomed to fail. The only preview we get is a game Chevy wants to play with audience members involving putting rubber bands around their heads and racing by scrunching their faces. And within 5 weeks of its debut, it was cancelled. Would have added another L to that, but I think you can spell it both ways. He later told Time magazine he wanted to do something much darker and more improv and blamed network constraints and not his own clear nervousness and incompetence for the show's failure. Again, he can't take any responsibility, and it's never my fault, it's your fault. Everybody else is wrong, not me. Howard Stern. Now, Howard Stern I don't know how he wasn't cancelled. His show is unbelievable. It can be very funny, but my God, how he was allowed to do some of the things he did. He brought a dead drug addict's ashes onto the show, and also her bones, and was taking them out and playing with them and trying to guess which part was which. He exploited disabled people. He had a Ku Klux Klan member on the show and the Black Panther, which, I mean, someone who was vehemently racist and someone who was very pro African American rights. You're looking for conflict there, and they were rating different races based on how bad they were. And you got your man Daniel Carver, who was a Grand Dragon. You know, they use all these stupid terms like Dungeons and Dragons almost. But it was unbelievable. But anyway, in 1992, Chase was recorded talking shit about Howard Stern in between commercial breaks on Larry King's show. Stern got a hold of the tape and played it on air before calling Chase, who told Stern never to call again. A few years later, Stern and Richard Belzer called the furious Chase several times at 5 a.m. The two apparently made up, and Chase was invited to Stern's wedding, but apparently gave a wildly inappropriate toast that only exacerbated Stern's disliking of him. Will Ferrell. Now, how can you fall out with Will Ferrell? Everybody loves Will Ferrell. Step Brothers, this house, so fucking prison. Got a belly full of white dog shit at me. I could quote Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly all day, so we'll get into this before I do. Love Will Ferrell. So, and the cast from 1996 to 1997 season, and that's when he left. When he was here, Tim Meadows says in Live from New York, it was just like watching a car accident over and over again, just watching him deal with people. According to Will Ferrell, Chase was a little snobbish and prone to screaming at people. At that show's first meeting, he told a female writer, maybe you could give me a hand job later, reportedly mortifying Lorne Michaels. I don't know if he was on something or what, Ferrell said. If he took too many back pills that day or something, just kind of having a little dig at him, but why not? Fuck him if he's willing to make those jokes. Bill Maher also seems like quite a high conflict personality, but also someone who backs into a corner when you prove them wrong. But anyway, he fell out with him too, and NYPD Blue creator Stephen Bochco. Chase appeared on Politically Incorrect in 1997 alongside television producer Stephen Boschko, or Boscho, said it differently here, so Boscho, and insistently hijacked the conversation to talk about how television and Boschko's work in particular is useless and worthless. The Paley Centre has a good summary. Shortly thereafter, he admits that he is not terribly familiar with Boschko's work. When Maher attempts to get the conversation back on track, Chase declares that he disapproves even of Maher's show. Bochco suggests that Chase leave the show, and Chase almost immediately makes it out the door before Maher stops him and asks him to stay. Kevin Smith. Same year, Chevy met with Kevin Smith to talk about relaunching the Fletch series. According to Smith, the meeting was a disaster. At the lunch, Chevy went on to claim he invented every funny thing that ever happened in the history of not just comedy, but also the known world. You ever sat down with somebody who claimed responsibility for stuff he did and didn't do? It's really off-putting. Chase later accused Smith of lying to him. Jesus, talk about arrogance. It's like he's trying to make people hate him. Gets off on it. Comedian Rob Hubel, who described himself as the biggest Chevy Chase fan in the world, approached Chevy backstage at UCB Theatre to introduce himself, only to have Chevy slap him across the face offensively hard. It was done as a joke, good humour, Chase told New York Magazine, and Hubel says he didn't take offence, but it clearly left an impression on him and an on-looking Jason Mantzoukas. Jason Mantzoukas is funny. He has a very angry but yet lovable persona. Actually, no. The 2002 Friars Club roast of Chevy Chase, one of the most interminable things broadcast on Comedy Central. Maybe the only thing Chevy's been involved with professionally where he didn't end up pissing anyone off. And yet we did. We have to mention it here, if only because it's maybe the best and saddest evidence of how few friends Chevy has left, and all by his own design. It's his own fault. Almost no one from the original Saturday Night Live showed up. Paul Schaefer, a member of the band, MC'd, yeah. And the comedians who did show up weren't exactly close friends of Chase and were unbelievably cruel, not to mention unfunny. I caught this on TV at the time without really having a sense of how widely hated Chevy was. By the end, there was literally no question that nobody liked him. But he seems to have been extremely up his own arse, and when he was on top, he certainly made a point of dragging everybody else down. So you have to kind of go, well, fuck him. He doesn't deserve any sympathy. Dan Harmon, another fella. Show creator Harmon, himself reputedly a sensitive and vindictive prick, has been embroiled in a weirdly public feud with Chevy almost since the start of the show. And it's not hard to see the uncomfortable parallels between Chevy himself and his character Pierce Hawthorne, an old, out of touch, self aggrandizing bigot who alienates all of the people he works with. Their sniping turned into a full on confrontation over the last week when Harmon, sparring from an onset spat over a late script, gave a very public fuck you to Chase at the party in front of his wife and daughter and leaked a hilariously profane voicemail that Chevy had left for him. To be fair, Harmon apologised in a meandering Tumblr post. I'm a selfish baby and a rude asshole and not a person to trust with your feelings. Meanwhile, the sort of poignant interview with the Huffington Post, Chase hints that he might leave the show soon, insisting that he wants a much freer kind of performance thing, which is much, which is more or less what he said about the Chevy Chase show 20 years ago. Basically saying, yeah, good luck with that. Chevy Chase throws a tantrum. Community creators got bad writing. Shit, stinko. Looks like Chevy Chase and community writer Dan Harmon are embroiled in a good old fashioned, we won't even bother getting to that, Dino Stamatopoulos and much of the community cast. This is something new that he's in, where he plays an old, out of touch man, which basically describes what he is. So, Chevy has a reputation for being a dick. Dino Stamatopoulos, who plays the character Starburst, sweets that we get here, told Mark Maron on his podcast last year that reputation is earned. Stamatopoulos nevertheless insists that he personally likes Chevy and that all the actor needs is a little respect, which he apparently doesn't get from the younger cast. Update: Dino writes in, Chevy mostly pissed me off when I was working on the Conan O'Brien show, back around 1994. I had been working hard all week on a very complex desk piece. It played the segment right before Chevy came on and did it okay. Did okay. Sorry. It played the segment right before Chevy came out and it did okay. After Chevy was introduced, he sat down and the first thing he said was, Wow, Conan. That bit, referring to the desk piece, was sure stupid. So he said, Wow, Conan, that bit sure was stupid. So he just slagging him off, you know. And also, just to clarify, I get along with Chevy because I barely work with him and don't have him constantly ruining whole days when I'm there, like he does with the regular guest members. So I'll say it again. Also, just to clarify, I get along with Chevy because I barely work with him and don't have him constantly ruining whole days when I'm here, like he does with the regular cast members. I view him now as a confused old man who really can't hurt me in any way. I understand why the regulars on Community and the full-time writers hating him. If he wasted my time as much as he wasted their time, I'd hate him too. So Yvette Brown, Alison Brie, Megan Gantz, and probably most of the show's female staff, all female comedians. No one has come out and said specifically, I hate Chevy Chase, but there are hits on Watch What Happens Live. Yvette Brown didn't have to think before naming Chevy Chase as the person she'd kick off Community if she had to choose one of them. Asked by the Daily Beast's Jace Lacob, listen, Lace Jacob, it's like they've got the two mixed around. Asked by the Daily Beast's Jace Lacob about an uncomfortable rape joke, Jesus, very not really something you joke about. Chevy made at a panel appearance by the cast. Brown and a fellow cast member, Alison Brie, and writer Megan Gantz were diplomatic but not particularly warm. His bits are from a different time, Gantz says. A lot of crass comedy is accepted, Brie offers. Some people don't know how to word it the right way. Brown agrees that some people don't know their room. Maybe he was from a time when women weren't empowered enough to speak up. I'm glad that we're in a time now where if you were offended or upset by something someone says, you feel empowered to say, that's not right. Chase doesn't seem to be helping things by telling the Huffington Post that the only two relatable characters are the two white girls, the two pretty young girls, Alison Brie and Gillian Jacobs, who are probably more like people that we can all understand. Yeah, and I've seen Alison Brie before. I know she's quite good looking. She's got brown hair and a nice smiley face. She's quite bubbly and seems quite pleasant as well. But you can see how much they hate Chevy Chase, and that's kind of it's a negative note. But he's brought it all on himself. You know, Alison Brie doesn't strike me as the type. I don't really know Gillian Jacobs, Megan Gantz that well. But I've seen Alison Brie and stuff with Will Ferrell and Get Hard, and I just think she doesn't seem like the type to fall out with people easily. She seems quite funny and outgoing as well as being pretty. And I think it also reminds us of why things are so PC as annoying as they might be. Um, because they have to be, because people like Chevy Chase were able to get away with being an absolute arsehole and putting people down all the time. I think it's safe to call him a dinosaur and say that it's good that he's not allowed to get away with this shit anymore. So let me get to one of my favourite men, John Candy, who was loved by all. Well, you can see here he was born 1950 and died 1994, aged 43. RIP, because what a guy. And he's Canadian. Nobody else can claim. He was in a film with Chevy Chase, National Lampoon's Vacation, and he was a security guard in Blues Brothers. I thought he was in Blues Brothers, but I didn't know what. This is my favourite film, though, Uncle Buck. Yeah. Just want to show you that because I love that image. I love Uncle Buck. Wasn't the biggest fan of Spaceballs. That wasn't really my favourite, but I do like John Candy, and as a person, he seems like a really good human being. And where Chevy Chase was like an upper class snob, John Candy was brought up in a working class Catholic family, a good Catholic family. That's what you need. And his father, Sidney, was born to English parents who immigrated to Canada in 1913. He's of Ukrainian and Polish descent through his mother, and his father died of complications of heart disease at the age of 35 on John's fifth birthday. So, obviously, a family history there. His father was also in the military, and never really talks about him much. I guess he didn't really know him that well because he was only young when he died. Played he played American football as you guys call it, which is apparently quite big in Canada as well, which I didn't know until reading about John Candy. And he had a dream of becoming a professional football player until he hurt his knee, and probably contributed to him gaining all the weight that he did because, I mean, the elephant in the room, no pun intended, he was a very heavy man, and I can relate to that. And having been told of high blood pressure, I completely understand, you know, what it's like to struggle with your weight. especially when you get an injury, and people think you're just a fat fuck when you're trying, but you're injured and you can't train. It's very disheartening, and quite literally because you lose your hair. Dan Aykroyd was mentioned, and Dan Aykroyd is someone who I might do a video on as well. People who motivate me and good people with autism, and Dan Aykroyd's certainly one of them. Gotta love that face. I loved Trading Places with Eddie Murphy. Or he does play a snob, Winthorpe, Louis Winthorpe. Valentine! Those men wanted to have sex with me. Oh, and when Eddie Murphy started doing exchange student from Cameroon, beef jerky. And I'm just quoting an actor that I like. That's all I'm doing. Nobody get offended. It's all in good spirits. So, I'm not really going to go through the career anyway because his legacy speaks for himself. And another man we have to love is Eugene Levy. That's great, honey. Also known as Jim Levinstein's dad. And Catherine O'Hara, aka Kevin McAllister's mom. A lot of great Canadian actors out there. You can see how close Dan Aykroyd was with John Candy. Quite tall as well, if he's not standing on something, because John Candy was a tall man. Let's have a look. He was about 6'3", 6'4", big fella. Camp Candy. He played Wilbur the Albatross in The Rescuers Down Under. I remember that. Maureen O'Hara. Oh, yeah. R.I.P. to another great Irish actress. So, Candy and his wife, Rosemary Hober, had two children, and it was quite sad looking at them and their stories of John Candy. His son and his daughter, like they were obviously in tears because he was such a beloved character, larger than life, literally, physically and metaphorically. But people made fun of him when he was trying not to say anything. They also liked him being fat, and they used to say it all the time. But yeah, he had tried to lose weight, and people kept pulling him back. Because that was his character, and he gave to everybody. He put everybody else's needs before his own, and it was at his own detriment, unfortunately. But you can see in 1991, Bruce McNall, who screwed him over, convicted felon, yeah, tried to sell the club and was done for fraud. That really hurt John Candy as well. You could see the pain in his eyes afterwards that he was betrayed by a friend like that. Wayne Gretzky, who was a hockey player, yeah, that's right. And Candy became owners of the Canadian Football League's Toronto Argonauts. Celebrity ownership group attracted attention in Canada, and the team spent a significant amount of money, even signing some highly touted National Football League prospects, such as wide receiver Rajiv Ismail. And there he is. The Argonauts took home the 1991 Grey Cup, beating Calgary 36-21 in the final. And Martin Short said that the Grey Cup is basically Canada's version of the Super Bowl. That's what he said. Only McCall's name was originally etched onto the Grey Cup trophy as the owner of the team, but in 2007, Candy's and Gretzky's names were added as well. Another narcissistic prick, McNall, who tried to sell the club and committed fraud, but tried taking all the credit. You can just see how people like him are motivated by greed and they're self-serving, like Chevy Chase, and how tiring it is to deal with them. Candy publicly battled. He shared his experiences of living with severe anxiety and panic attacks. Yeah, and unfortunately, that was his downfall. Candy died in his sleep at the age of 43 on March 4th, 1994, in Durango, Mexico, while filming Wagons East. The spokeswoman said that Candy's cause of death was, like his father, a heart attack. Unfortunately, he struggled with obesity and weighed more than 375 pounds, 170 kilos, at some points in his life. Candy had a number of risk factors for heart attack, which in the documentary it showed that he was really ignoring doctors' warnings, as they were getting more impending. He had a strong family history. His father obviously dying so young, prematurely of a heart attack, although his children say he was unaware of his genetic risk. Smoked a pack of cigarettes a day, was clinically obese, and I would not say anything bad about the man because he seemed like a lovely fella, but he was clinically obese, and that can't be ignored. It was the proverbial elephant in the room. Obesity, alcohol abuse, and cocaine use. And he was very much in denial, He he kind of, everybody said that his attitude was, if I don't admit to it, it's not there. And we've all done that, you know. Sure, only Friday I found out that my blood pressure is 158 over 105, and that's quite worrying at my age. So, and my dad's had a heart attack, my both my uncles have had stents put in their hearts. My granddad, as old as he was when he died, he had a heart attack as well. So it's something I have to really watch out for and take better care of myself. Not drinking, that's one that's really standing to me, and it will stand to me. However, Candy was concerned about his weight. He once lost 100 pounds, 45 kilos, over a summer while preparing to film Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Loved him in that. Him and Steve Martin were a great combo. He frequently dieted and exercised with trainers because of his family history. And as sad as it was, and really was sad that he died so young, but this is the legacy he left. It makes you think, how lonely will Chevy Chase be when he dies? Because of the type of human he was, not giving a shit about anyone but himself. Whereas, look at all the people who showed love for John Candy, and the best moment is yet to come. His legacy will be remembered forever. So Candy's funeral was held at St. Martin of Tours Catholic Church, Martin of Tours, I presume he's French, in Los Angeles, with a eulogy by Dan Aykroyd. On March 18, 1994, a special memorial service for Candy, produced by his former improvisation group, The Second City, was broadcast across Canada. Catherine O'Hara gave the eulogy, and O'Hara's sister, Mary Margaret O'Hara, what a good Irish name, MMO, sang her song Dark Dear Heart. Wagons East was completed using a stunt double and special effects, and released 5 months after Candy's death. His final completed film was Canadian Bacon, a satirical comedy by Michael Moore. Released, Michael Moore is a divisive character himself because he shines a light on a lot of topics and is also talked about his battle with his weight, a larger than life character, which South Park really ripped into, and I thought it was quite bad. So his final completed film was Canadian Bacon, a satirical comedy by Michael Moore, released a year after Candy's death. Candy played American Sheriff Bud Boomer, who led an invasion of Canada, also done by South Park. Yeah, Canada. Canada, sweet Canada. Candy recorded a voice for the TV film The Magic Seven in the early 90s. The film remained in production for years owing to animation difficulties and production delays, and it was eventually shelved. Candy was posthumously inducted, so after his death, into Canada's Walk of Fame in 1998, the year I was born. There we go. In May 2006, Candy became one of the first four entertainers ever honoured by Canada Post in being featured on the postage stamp, which much deserved. On October the 31st, 2020, with COVID in full flight, Toronto Mayor John Tory proclaimed John Candy Day in honour of what would have been John Candy's 70th birthday. And that's the legacy he has over Chevy Chase as well. You know, someone who was beloved, who put everybody else before themselves, looked out for everyone. And I heard in the documentary that he used to be down on the side of the pitch with the Argonauts and would help injured players off the pitch, which is, you know, just a testament to who he was. Blues Brothers 2000 is dedicated to three people, including Candy, who played a supporting role in the original Blues Brothers security guard. A tribute to Candy was hosted by Dan Aykroyd in 2007 Grey Cup festivities in Toronto in November 2007. Experimental rock band Ween's album Chocolate and Cheese, released in 1994, is dedicated in loving memory to John Candy, 1950 to 1994, when he died. At the time, lead singer Gene Ween remarked, "There was so much going on about the suicide of Kurt Cobain, RIP to him too, and nobody mentioned John Candy at all." Kurt Cobain, someone I definitely would be interested in talking about too, if you'd ever like me to do a video on that. So let me know. Nobody mentioned John Candy. I have a special little spot in my heart for him. That's nice to hear. After his death, the John Candy Visual Arts Studio at Neil McNeil and Gene Wayne, these names have got to be made up. Neil McNeil Catholic High School in Toronto was dedicated in his honour. Do people from Toronto say Toronto? Is that how they say it? I think it is. Candy, one of the school's most famous alumni, said during one of his annual visits to the school, "My success is simply rooted in the values and discipline and respect for others that I was taught at Neil McNeil." It has been suggested, among others, that the Canadian Screen Awards be given the official nickname the Candies, both in honour of the actor and because the name suggests Canada. American comedian Conan O'Brien, another good Irish name and very Irish looking man, credits Candy as giving him advice that led to his career in comedy. Instead of slagging him off like Chevy Chase did, he actually built him up when he was at his start. You know, he wasn't big yet. He wasn't the Conan O'Brien of the Conan O'Brien show. And John Candy didn't look down on him. He helped him out. O'Brien met Candy while at Harvard and said, "Mr. Candy, I'm thinking I might try comedy." And John Candy replied very seriously, and I remember this in the documentary, "You don't try comedy, you do it or you don't do it." Basically, you go at it, you know, you have it or you don't. You don't give it a try. You commit everything to it. You know what I mean? John Candy, I Like Me, a documentary film about Candy's life and career, was directed by Colin Hanks and produced by Ryan Reynolds, who ain't looking too hot right now. So the part that I wanted to mention, I'm glad actually that they didn't mention it here because I'm going to mention it. At his funeral, and I actually think saying this to you will be even better. But Eugene Levy was saying when they were in the hearse, the pallbearers, so it was Dan Aykroyd, Eugene Levy, Martin Shaw was there. Don't know, was Catherine O'Hara there? I think it was men who were doing it, Steve Martin as well. A few others. I can't remember all of them, but I know Chevy Chase wasn't there anyway. But they were driving along, and Eugene Levy goes and says, "There's no cars on the road." And then they just said they've shut down the highway. Martin Short was like, "Oh my God, they've shut down the highway, the Canadian highway, in honour of John Candy." And they've never done that for anyone except the Pope and the President, only two other people. And that'll just show you, and I think that's a lovely way to end this. And as an example of how you'll be remembered by people if you treat them with decency and are a good human being. So I know sometimes it is easy to see bad people getting ahead and think, my God, they're a shithead to everybody, they're an arsehole, but they get ahead in life. Well, Chevy Chase got ahead in life and he's his own worst enemy by being a perpetual arsehole. People just said, "Do you like this guy? I don't like him. I don't like him either. He's a fucking arsehole." And he just can't stop being an arsehole. And yes, he's 82 years old. and he's much older than poor John Candy ever got to be. But John Candy is certainly someone who'll be remembered a lot more fondly than Chevy Chase, and there's a reason for that. When I look at my granddad Peter and my granddad Liam, I know who I'd rather be, and I think that's a really good legacy to leave. Someone who cared about other people, and don't you want to be remembered that way, as opposed to someone who everybody tolerated and didn't like, you know? So when it feels like you're being used and abused, you put yourself out for people who deserve it and you help others and you build other people up, not pushing them down. People will remember it. And the reason why I compared to my granddad's was that my mum said I was there with her at my granddad Peter's funeral. I was only young, very young, but you couldn't get into the church because there was that many people at the funeral. And my granddad Lane, like there were a fair few people at it, but a lot of them went because they liked my grandmother, now Lena. And a lot of people just tolerated him. They stopped coming to see him because he was very unpleasant to deal with. And he complained that nobody came to see him. It was like, you've driven everybody away. Chevy Chase was complaining about the people who showed up at his roast because it was supposed to be friends. And he's got no friends left because he dissed them all. He shot all over them. And they all left. People will leave. And that's a reminder that if you're being obnoxious and you're being an arsehole, everybody else isn't wrong. Maybe you were wrong, and maybe you need to look at it. And if you're not willing to do that, unfortunately, tough shit. Moral of the story: be a John Candy, be a Grandad Peter. Don't be a Grandad Lame or a Chevy Chase. All right, be a good human being. All right, and I think it's a nice way to leave it off. They closed down the highway for John Candy. They've only done that for the president and the Pope. Would they do that for Chevy Chase? Not a fucking chance. So there we are. That's what happens when you're a good person. People care and they remember you fondly. Slán go fótball.